Hi, everybody. This is Ing, and I am about to start our next chat today with Ben Sloat, who, yes, hi, everybody. I'll start over. This is Ing, and I am about to start our Wednesday edition of our last week of the Praise You chat. I've been doing these for 5 weeks now, and they've been amazing. And if you guys are interested at all in looking at what is going on from the past, check it out in the link in the bio. We've spoken with museum directors, curators, opera conductors, dancers, all sorts of people in the creative industries as an attempt to kind of get insights on how the creative world is dealing with COVID-19. So today I have Ben Sloat, and I see you, Ben. We're going to put you on in a minute. Ben and I actually live in the same town, which is wonderful, but we have even more in common, which we'll talk about. So Ben, get ready. Let's do this. I hope everyone's doing well. Give me a thumbs up too if you're having a great day, if you're happy to see us. I'm happy to see you. And I'm going to be happy to see Ben. Hi.
How's it going?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. It's been great to follow these series of chats. I found them really enriching.
Thank you.
And just to kind of see how people are processing this experience in real time has been really, really amazing. And also multidimensional from very different positions
Awesome.
Dealing with the creative industry. So that's been really great.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to have you. Here's my cup of tea.
Oh, I got this Sapporo glass, but it's just water. It's not vodka.
I'm going to sip my tea. So this is what's really funny about how I know Ben. I actually know Ben not through the art world, not through just simply living in Boston, but actually through our daughters. And our two daughters are in the same grade and in the same class at their public school in Brookline. And my daughter had just moved from New York in August of 2019. And she was really nervous, obviously, fifth grade, meeting all new people. And I was nervous for her. I picked her up on the first day of school. And Sadie, my daughter, goes, "Mommy, can I have a play date?" on day one. And I was stunned because, who are you having a play date with on day one? And it was Ben's daughter, Lily, and they are great friends. And then we got to know Ben and Candace, his wife, and I've just learned a lot about your work too, and your work with Leslie. So I'd love to hear about that actually first. Tell us a little bit about the MFA program at Leslie, which you run and direct.
Great, yeah. So I've been part of that program since 2010, and I became director in 2016. And our MFA program is quite unique because we are low residency. So we meet for these 10-day intensives every June and January. So we're ramping up for our June one, which is happening, so it's the 19th of June. And it's a way for folks to really have this sort of intensive set of conversations and seminars and critiques. And a really wonderful community. And to me, it really distills a lot of what we look for in an arts community into this kind of intensive block. And then folks can return to wherever they live, and they live all around the country and some are international, to work and kind of maintain their studio practice in their places of residence. And that way, they really learn how to balance being an artist with their lives and their jobs and family and other obligations. So it's been a really wonderful way to think about how art can be taught on a graduate level and to maintain a lot of rigorous discourses, but also maintain those bonds and connections that I think are so essential, which I think has been really well sort of broadcast through your chats. It's all about kind of the way we converse, the way we feel connected, and the way we kind of rethink how we approach the world.
And, Leslie University, being in Cambridge, Massachusetts, you're in this cluster of the most famous universities in the entire world. And what I've learned about moving. I'm from Boston, in case people don't know, but I hadn't lived here in about 20 years. And coming back to Boston, it was so eye-opening seeing how many working artists there are, but also how many opportunities there are for artists to be involved with the MFA programs and the institutions that are here. For Leslie, it's a little bit different because of the low residency portion. How did that come about? Is this like a common practice in MFA programs, or is Leslie unique in that way?
I think it's become, well, I guess two things about what you just mentioned. I think the diversity of arts experiences have been really enriching for Boston. I think Boston has a kind of recognition as being a town of institutions. So we have these great museums and we have a lot of well-established institutions. But I think it's been really great to see a lot of collaboration between different institutions. Like I remember the ICA had this really wonderful show of art in the age of the internet, and they partnered with like 12 different institutions around the area. And so we've been able to partner too with like the Cordova and hire folks who teach at Harvard and MIT and BU and Brandeis to be part of our program. But our program was started around 2003, so we're actually the second oldest MFA program in the country, is my understanding. But it's become an increasingly popular model. So I would say a lot of major art schools have developed different versions of this because I think it has sort of flexibility. It has kind of intimacy and connectivity, and it's for folks who can't really move to a completely different part of the country to do their MFA. And a lot of the folks in our program are already working professionals. So they're already sort of, got a lot of professional skills and career under their belt, and they come here to really enrich their artistic practice, which they may have put on the shelf for a little while.
I think that's really cool. And it's, first of all, props to Boston and Cambridge. I'm all for it. If you're a Bostonian, give us some hearts here. I saw Paul Hub was on this chat. So Paul, who leads the MIT List Museum. And they're great institutions, and people know that about Boston. But I don't know if people, I guess I'm speaking of this in terms of someone from New York who came from New York for so long. To be known as like a crucial center for contemporary art and practice, it's something that is very much in the shadow of a city like New York. But there are so many artists working here. And I think that now with COVID-19 and how it has shifted how we all are interacting and learning, the low residency model might be a marker for what's to come. I mean, or are you hearing from peers from other institutions kind of looking to adopt a similar type of model?
Yeah, we've certainly heard a lot of folks building different versions. So like when Greg Bornowitz built the low res at SAIC, he was friends with my predecessor, Judith Barry. And so he came and gave a talk and sort of inquired. And each model, I think, is quite different. I would say some low res models are studio based. So they have like Bard is maybe not considered low res, but it has a kind of studio-based summer program. We're quite different than that because I think we want to get to the heart of the kind of critique and that interaction in the community. But there are a number of programs in the region that have kind of studio-based block models. I don't know what it's going to look like this summer. And I do think we're ideally suited to respond to COVID. And so we've been expanding, different programs that we're offering for June. And I'm excited to share that Jerry Saltz will be giving remarks on, what do next days in the art world look like.
And that is June 21st?
21st, it's a Sunday. Okay. And we'll have all this info on our Instagram if people want to see that. What we'll do, we're building a new website that's just for our program, and so this will be on YouTube Live for guests, and then folks in our community can participate on Zoom or YouTube Live if they want. But it's interesting that he's really talking about next steps in terms of the world of art, but not in the production of art or in the kind of practice of art. And I guess I've been thinking a lot in this kind of COVID situation about how, within this very kind of unprecedented moment, I think it kind of encourages us to think very differently about what a practice is or what do we need ultimately. I think it also dismantles any sense of regionality, at least for now, and I think it's always been funny to me because, I was born and raised in New York, and so I've had that identity, with me my whole life. And one could think that, artists in the 60s and 70s who were shown at major New York institutions like MoMA and the Whitney, maybe that's a local institution showing local artists as well. But there's a kind of neutrality there because New York has a kind of non-space being a certain center. But I think, I don't think there's anything specific about being an artist from Boston. There's no regional sensibility as much as I think there's a different kind of connectivity and a different kind of access. And I've been, really, really gratified by the level of conversation in Boston and the range of programming and the kind of collegiality and also the proximity that you could go and do a lot of things and see a lot of really major artists have shows or give talks. That's been really, really amazing. But I don't think the need to define oneself, regionally is as primary as it might have been in the past. But I have been doing a lot of thinking about, what does this scenario mean in terms of the production part and certainly in terms of the kind of educational community part as well.
Right. Well, for those who have just joined, this is Ben Sloat, the head of the MFA program at Lesley Art and Design. And if you have questions, I think a lot of people are kind of interested in this conversation. So start to put it in if you want to, and we'll try and get to them towards the end. But let's talk about how the pandemic has affected you and your leadership role at the institution. Even though Lesley is already low residency and people were already kind of doing what we're all doing right now, but on a more regular basis at Lesley. Well, first of all, how is this affecting the school in terms of your schedule going forward for the summer, for the fall? Are you guys going to be convening students in a physical way?
No, we're not doing that. And I have heard stories of other schools convening students in a physical way, and that would seem to be very challenging logistically. Like I've heard a story where in order to go to a certain school in their summer program from out of town, one has to quarantine for 2 weeks before they actually enter campus. And I think those logistical challenges, I think, are pretty overwhelming for students overall. I think for us, it's, I've had a lot of high value online interactions. And so I'm quite pleased and also about what are the access points. And I think, one element of being an artist as well as someone who's sort of running and kind of shepherding a community is adaptation and translation and sort of thinking in a nimble way and trying to maintain a lot of the larger concerns of what makes our program successful and supportive and interesting, and not being really caught up in what traditional barriers might have been. And so in terms of arts thinking, like, for example, I had a faculty meeting with the faculty a couple of weeks ago, and it was just so amazing to see everyone together. And immediately we just sort of fell back into the same level of ease and conversation. And so I suspect that will be a similar scenario for June, but we're probably going to add a whole bunch of other workshops. It was interesting hearing Brett Littman's chat with you and thinking about the kind of psychology of someone visiting the Noguchi Foundation and museum and like, what would it, where are they in terms of how they're feeling or where their head is at and what they're looking for in this experience. And I think, myself and my colleague, Rebecca Joy, who was amazing, we've been really thinking about, what are the psychological parameters, how to create a range of kinds of enrichment, how to empower students to sort of lead their own discussions and social events and even kind of student-led critiques. And I think all of these are really important tools for kind of the future profession of being an artist. And, art is only going to be more online in terms of the curatorial world, in terms of the discursive world, in terms of the kind of teaching world. So I think having these skills now can be an added value. I've heard of folks having like really tremendously positive studio visit experience and others who have been challenged. So we're really going to refine it so it could be kind of as high value as possible, but also having lingering long-term positives. I think all that to me is really, really key.
That's awesome. It was really reassuring the other day. On Monday, I had my chat with, I think he's on, Jose Carlos Diaz from the Andy Warhol Museum. And one of the questions from an audience member was, do you even like studio visits now done virtually. Will you continue? Will you do that? And Jose said, no, I love them and I encourage them and I want to do them. And I think there's a little bit of anxiety from what I've seen from artists, even though there's all this opportunity because now with Zoom and Instagram Live, there's more openness. But our curators, our museum directors, going to want to see your artworks via a two-dimensional format. And it was great to hear from someone like that this is very much something he wants to continue doing. But how are you, as the head of this program, helping to reassure students as they are either coming in for a new program or about to graduate about the longevity of their careers or how that should be sustained? Do you guys talk about that at all?
Oh, absolutely. And I teach the professional practice seminar, and I think of artists overall as being a kind of creative entrepreneur. Because if you think about what's expected of an artist in 2020 versus, say, 50 years ago, artists are expected to speak well and to speak in multiple ways about their work. Like they might speak in a certain way with a curator or an arts writer versus with a collector or, in a kind of art fair scenario. I think artists are expected to be very savvy with their web presence, whether that's a website or how they promote themselves on Instagram and how they talk about that. I think artists are sort of assumed to be able to code switch and kind of put themselves out there and to be really aware and do a lot of research about what's happening in contemporary art. And so, all of these are all kind of professional skill sets that maybe were not there 50 years ago. And I don't think the same expectation for this level of savviness. And I think in our program, we think a lot about even, what is financial savvy? How does an artist think about themselves in terms of, their taxes and their obligations in the kind of financial world, but also how do they manage projects? How do they manage other people if they're collaborating or they're getting fabricators to work? I also think a lot about, a kind of new intimacy. And I think, in this chat too, it's like, I'm looking at curators in their homes, which is a level of intimacy, which was kind of a one-way before, where the curator might come to your studio or your home, but now you see them in their home at this time. And so I think there's a kind of maybe dismantling of certain formalities and allowing folks to maybe adapt to a very new sense of intimacy in the midst of a much larger sense of isolation. So I think those new factors, I think, are important to consider. And I try to, bring that to the program too, that yes, we're using an online forum, but yes, this forum will be becoming increasingly common. And so let's get ourselves as acquainted with it as possible and to have sophisticated interactions.
Yeah. I love that you're teaching these practical skills and these practical, life skills, really, that I've met so many artists who have come out of MFA programs and had no idea how to deal with budgets. And they, it's not that they don't want to, it's just they were so focused during their program on studio practice that they were never encouraged to learn about these other things. But then here's the question. Let's say, we are free of the pandemic in, 2 years. We've all kind of adopted this form of technology, this type of intimacy. And then what happens? Do we go back? Do you foresee that we go back to how it used to be? Or do you think it's going to be a completely new world in terms of curator, artist, all of that whole ecosystem? Do you think it's going to change dramatically?
I think there will be a lot of major changes, but I also think there are new opportunities. So I think one major opportunity is going to be in the kind of civic realm. And so one symposium we had in January, which had all various stakeholders from foundations and from different public interest groups and nonprofits, was what is art? We had a civic practice symposium. So if I imagine or I project that in a year or two, they're going to be increasingly empty retail spaces, right? Which is a real prime location for artists to sort of enter into and kind of outreach to the community in those ways. And in that regard, artists will have to develop the skills to sort of connect with maybe a public-private consortium to permission and to receive funding. And I think about the project of like Theaster Gates, for example, in Chicago, which is very much on a kind of civic realm, but also into, he shows his work in museums, but as well as in like documenta, but ultimately it's rooted in a kind of civic engagement. And so I think, thinking about our students being from different parts of the country, wherever they are, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to show their work locally. I remember last summer, I went to visit some alums who were part of an arts walk in Western Mass in Pittsfield. And so they're showing their work in the lobby of movie theaters and in other sort of commercial spaces. At the same time, I looked across the street and there were like these beautiful empty storefronts. And I'm like, well, what about those spaces? How do you get your work in there? And I think artists are willing and able to adapt in a much more informal scenario, an informal social, cultural, economic scenario. I think a lot about the artists in the 70s who really used like New York itself as an artist material, Gordon Clark.
Like PS1, abandoned school. Yeah. No, I mean, and that came though, because there was a financial crisis. And I mean, and that might be what we're going into now. I mean, I sure hope not, but it's true. Artists took this crisis and turned it into an opportunity. Some of which are still around, some which are not around, but it's kind of fascinating because I feel like, there was this point when the economy was so hot and, artists were getting pushed out of all these major cities, major areas. And you're just thinking, when is this going to be our chance to do anything, fun or interesting? When are we going to get the 70s opportunity to do something under the Brooklyn Bridge or take over a school or whatnot? And I mean, just the other day, my husband, who but there's this corner in our neighborhood that is old school, beautiful, completely abandoned. And he's like, you got to do something there, and not that I want to touch that right now, but it is true. I'm sure you know exactly where I'm talking about. It's like right in Coolidge Corner. It's, it's right where the subway is. I mean, it's a prime location. It's just a matter of like how desperate landlords want to be, how the community gets involved. There's so many factors and then the question is, though, like, are we going to have amnesia over this period? I think I've spoken to a lot of artists who said that they think once we get out of this, we're not going to remember how this all went down or how we felt or how sad we were. We're just going to be so excited to move forward. It sounds like you, though, have a different outlook on that you think we're going to process this.
Yeah, and I think, I was thinking, I was talking to my wife the other day about this, is like, in a kind of art historical terms, we think about, post-World War II artists. And we think about, they're responding to the war or to the actions of the war. But one thing I had never thought about and I've never seen really written about is, all those artists were basically in isolation during these wars, right? Like if you're in World War I and or World War II, you're staying away from what's happening in terms of the violence. And so you're probably isolated or kind of self-quarantine in a number of ways. And that kind of creates a sort of incubation period. And then all those responses, create different kind of art scenarios. But I do think a couple things. I don't think artists necessarily need to follow the same economic patterns of any given society or culture. And we can see where, if the economy moves into a place which is highly gentrified and exclusive, it marginalizes artists. And maybe there's a new opportunity for artists to thrive, like you're saying, in a different moment where there's more access points. And I also don't think artists need permission. That if you think about great artists like Basquiat or Jenny Holzer, Keith Haring, Barbara Kruger, who are just putting their work directly into the world, I think there's a greater opportunity for that as well. And now we kind of romanticize that.
But this is the thing. I mean, those artists did put art into the world, and some saw the financial benefits of that, and some did not. So, that's a double-edged sword. Like, I can do what I want. I want to do what I want. Here's open space, or here's a storefront that's been abandoned. I'm going to make it. But then how do you support yourself, right? How do you, like, it's kind of a one-way street in some cases where an artist is just out there making, but then how does the artist get paid? And I think that's, right now in kind of this Instagram economy, right, where there's so much art out there, but a lot of it is out there for free, and artists are now saying, well, I need to monetize on this, I need to survive. What's your opinion of that?
Well, looking to the folks in our program, a lot of them are school teachers. A lot of them have more kind of traditional 9 to 5 jobs or are working from home. And so, there may not be a one-to-one where the art is also their kind of their primary income as well, but maybe a part of a larger sort of financial ecosystem for themselves. But, the talk I'm going to be giving, I gave this talk at Harvard in April called Art and the Value Economy. And it was really about how the kind of auction scenario arose and how that kind of developed, and thinking about issues of speculative capital and art as an asset class. And what's funny about that is artists are often left out of that equation, right? Like once the art is in that world, the artists are out of it. So they need to kind of think about other forms of how to kind of, create income for themselves anyway. Yeah. So I think artists have always been really well suited in a certain regard for that, even if the art themselves are not the primary source. And I think about, back to those artists like Joan Jonas and Jenny Holzer, I don't think they made money from their art directly for quite a while. Like I think, Joan had a major show at Gavin Brown, like in her mid-late 70s after her Venice Biennial exhibition. But she never saw herself as an artist who functioned most directly in the kind of gallery function. And I do think a lot of galleries will be fine. And I think a lot of galleries will thrive and adapt. But I do think that there are new models to consider, how do you accumulate the kind of spectrum of financial support necessary to do art? And one can do art under all kinds of conditions. So I'm always very optimistic about the production being made, but how all those other ingredients put together, I think, is quite an unknown. But I'm very, I feel that this could be a very kind of artistically important moment in the world.
I agree. Well, a couple of years ago, I was very involved with a company called Snark.art that worked on blockchain as a way for artists to, not just produce art and mostly digital art, but also for a way for artists to receive secondary sales royalties. And the secondary sales royalties issue to me is a really big one for artists because, I used to work at Sotheby's and I couldn't believe it when, something would make millions of dollars and the artists see nothing of it. But there has to be, and I think now that the art world is online, like there will be a faster, more accelerated adoption of these new technologies. But when I was at NADA Art Fair for this company 2 years ago, and it would take me like 45 minutes to talk to, a collector and artist about why, why this format might be really positive for you as an artist or as a collector. And there was just a lot of pushback, like, well, I don't want to do that stuff. I like seeing my art. I like living with it. And I get it. I mean, I do too. But the model right now for how artists are making their living is not working. And, I used to be the PR director at PS1, and I remember, I will not name her name because she's now deceased and she's a hero, but she was a seminal feminist performance artist. And a magazine a TV show wanted to put her on, kind of like a BBC equivalent. She wanted to be paid, to be on a news channel, and the news, they don't pay you to go on the news. Like, you don't, it's editorial. It took a long time for me to explain, like, look, I'm sorry, they just won't pay you, but if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Anyway, I called her gallery to explain that I'm having some difficulty trying to get this artist to come on this news program. And they just said, she didn't get paid for 30 years. So now all she wants to do is get paid. And so I think about that a lot, as that they're giving so much for years and years. And there's a certain point when they just go, I just need to get paid no matter what. And there has to be a more balanced solution to how, artists are putting their work out there and how they're getting compensated.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of my own philosophy, especially regarding the program, a lot of it is artists taking initiative for themselves. And I think, often there's a kind of mystified culture that surrounds them, and they feel like a lack of access to that, or there are a lot of gates that artists need to pass through. And I think part of what I think could happen is artists can really control that a lot more, and be in front of that a lot more. But I think for a long time, artists were at the mercy of a lot of those other situations, or at the mercy of kind of shifts in cultural policy and social policy. But one thing I'm grateful in America, because I've met with artists on a kind of international realm, is even art where there might be a lot of grants from certain countries. Often that is like the one avenue in which they can, I remember it being in Denmark, and they're like, well, there's this one cycle and we can get a lot of money from the government, but if you don't, you don't get it. And they started making making work that would align with what they thought the jurors would want to respond to. And it compromised their art in a lot of ways. Whereas in the US, there are ways to get some public funding and some private funding, and one can blend a job. So I think that kind of spectrum of access can be very empowering for artists as well.
That's great. Okay, guys, we have 1 minute. Seriously, if you have questions, put it on here. But Ben and I have so much to talk about, so we can just continue talking. Well, let's ask you this. I mean, you've been busy kind of fostering your community at Leslie. What has brought you solace or comfort during this time from perhaps an art level? What have you seen that you've loved?
A number of things. Carrie Moyer is going to come to speak in our program in June, which I'm excited about that. But she just this beautiful conversation through her gallery, I think with Piper Marshall, and it was just like really casual and wonderful, and I've been really grateful for all of the conversations. I love art talks, because at art talks you really get the privilege of kind of being inside, the head of an artist or an artist professional for a certain amount of time, and understand like where they're coming from and how they see the world, or what are they responding to. So that to me has always been a great privilege, and so I've been able to experience way more art talks in a very compressed set of time, and even how my own time sort of circulates on a daily basis, just not having to commute, and not just not being in the car, and I can't even believe how much I just was like zipping around town and taking care of this and that, and here it can all be kind of centralized. And so ultimately that's been unexpected and kind of satisfying in a strange way. But our thematic for the June residency is on social abstraction, because so much of our society is kind of so difficult to reference. How do we reference all the kind of data visualizations and all the numbers that are thrown at us every single day, and different increases, and all that has been really, really hard for me to parse. And I'm hoping the residency is a way for us to all engage with that on a more personal level.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait I hope you guys continue to share all this information on the Leslie MFA, social media sites, because I think what you're doing is really, really interesting. And it's a different kind of conversation. So I thank you, and we're out of time. But this will be up for 24 hours. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And this will be up for 24 hours on the stories, and then I'll archive it for YouTube, so it will be shared on another platform. Thank you. I hope you're doing well. Say hi to the family.
I will do. Say hi to yours as well. Okay.
Okay. Bye, everybody. See you later.